So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which we talk about issues relating to public transportation. And I'm going to go back to talking about connections between regional rail and intercity rail in the northeastern United States. I made a video about this maybe 2 weeks ago, in which I was drawing an exclusion around New York. I was talking about the situation in Boston and Eastern New England in general. I was talking about the situation in Philadelphia and in Washington. Um, I made an argument that so Philadelphia is kind of the easy one, just because in Philadelphia the lines are four. They have four tracks, and the commuter traffic is not so heavy that it needs both pairs of tracks, the local and the express track. So there are a bunch of ways to make everything fit in. Um, Boston and Washington are actually very similar in that they're at the end of the Northeast Corridor, they're the opposite ends of the Northeast Corridor. They each have a major secondary city about 70 kilometers toward New York. In the Boston area, that is Providence. In the Washington area, it is Baltimore. There is commuter rail between these two pairs of cities with rather frequent service at rush hour, very poor frequency off and reverse peak, but the peak determines the infrastructure requirements. This is one of the reasons that when you run a rail network, really any public transportation system, you should avoid running it predominantly at rush hour if you're spending so much capital money on enabling the capacity for a lot of rush hour service. That already gives you the ability to run frequent off-peak service. It's often a waste to run the exact same frequency all day, especially when the frequency is extraordinarily high. Like all these driverless metros that run every, let's say, minute 40 or 2 minutes at rush hour, they never run that off-peak. They run every, let's say, 3 minutes off-peak. But if you're running every 15 minutes rush hour, you should probably also be running every 15 minutes, not at rush hour. Maybe every half hour if it's a very long trip. I can almost see Boston to Providence work as every half hour, but probably every 15 minutes is better for that. Something like Boston to Cape Cod, this is something that should be every half hour. This is probably about an hour each way. This is a very fast line. It's maybe not easy to see at the zoom level, but this is actually a straight line. There's a little bit of curviness there, more than on Boston to Providence, but this is but this is still not very curvy. Most of this is good for 160 kilometers an hour. The few bits that aren't, like maybe this is maybe short sections of 130, 140. It's not like there are long sections of 80, 90. And there aren't a lot of good places for stations. So this is essentially what I would call a regional express line in Germany, or maybe even we would call it an intercity line at this point, because this is a line that if it existed in Germany, and to be very clear, lines like that exist in Germany, Deutsche Bahn would have long spun it off to the States to run it with local subsidies. And so this is something that probably works every half hour. I can even see it run every hour and would not be very good, but people would ride this minimum every half hour. I wouldn't even think about doing an hour. I would go straight to half hour for this, and again, probably every 15 minutes. So at any rate, the peak determines the infrastructure requirements, and the infrastructure requirements are that on both Boston to Providence and Washington to Baltimore, it is necessary to run these commuter trains, making a bunch of stops on the way alongside very fast intercity trains, and this requires overtakes, timed overtakes. The alternative to overtakes is to four-track the entire lines. This is something that there is a project to do that in Maryland, but it's not a great project. They should four-track strategic sections instead. Um, and in Boston, there's this wish list of triple tracking the entire thing or most of the thing. But again, it's a stupid project. Certainly, if it's 3 and not 4 tracks. Um, and again, it's a good place for timed overtakes. And Boston to Providence, they figured this out many years ago, and I think it's called Providence One Socket Follow-Up. This blog post. Literally, parts of it are things that I figured. Like, this timetable is basically live. Like, I think this is actually very similar to the live Transit Matters timetable. This is how stable this is. For Boston area stuff, regionalrail.net is where you want to go to. And it requires a bit more work, Washington to Baltimore, but not a lot. And then I accepted like EXC, not ACC, New Haven to Trenton from that video, and the reason is that is hard. New Haven to Trenton. Yeah, actually the planning docs, technically the spreadsheet that I'm working from is 1 second precision. It's just that everything is rounded to a half minute. I thought that BR planning was, or maybe it's just London, that it's every 15 seconds. New York City Transit is to the half minute, and that's not enough. But that's because New York City Transit needs a train every 2 minutes, so if it's to a half minute precision. Did I say precision? Precision, I'm not Canadian. Then it needs to get a train every 2.5 minutes, and the trains get overcrowded because you need 30 TPH and you only get 24. So anyway, I accepted New Haven to Trenton from that video on the grounds that it is hard. There's you know that saying that of America's favorite Harvard legacy, JFK, about we don't do this because it is easy, but because it is hard. We do this because it is necessary, but we do it later because this requires a lot of much more detailed work than I'm gonna do on stream. But in a couple months they will know more. Certainly in about a year. But let's start by clawing at this. So again, New Haven to Trenton is the hardest part, and it is the hardest part for several reasons. First of all, New York to New Haven and New York. I don't remember if it's New York to Trenton where you need to do it, or New York to both Trenton and the Jersey Shore, but these are the two busiest commuter rail lines in the United States. Now, it does matter a little bit what you count as a line, because the LIRR is full of these individual branches that do weird things like they don't overlap. This is really bad planning, and we're going to talk about this in a bit. But for example, you have the Hempstead branch on the LIRR. It's all the stops up to the split, which is Floral Park. And let's zoom in enough that they can actually see Hollis, Queens Village, and Belrose. Then the trains all go to on this branch. They should also go on this branch to East Garden City, which alongside Mineola is the only significant suburban job center within Long Island. The rest of Long Island jobs, of which are very many, are not at specific edge cities. They're extremely diffuse, like one mall, like it's kind of eventually, but random mall, or someone cleaning the house of a rich person who lives 15-minute drive from the train station. But that aside, the trains from Hampstead do this. They make all these stops, and then this is a separate line, the main line, and all of these trains that serve Mineola and Points Pass, they don't stop at Floral Park or at Belrose or Queens Village. They just express from. Often they also don't stop at Maryland Avenue and New Hyde Park. Some, a few do, most don't. And then from whichever of these they stop at, or Mineola, they just express down to Jamaica. Sometimes they even skip Jamaica. So it's branches that are run completely separately. If you're thinking that this is, okay, it's 15 seconds now. It used to be 30. Okay. So it's this kind of weird branch-based planning, and the reason they do this is because the purpose of the LIRR is to get the nice white flighters of Long Island from their nice white flight suburbs, where the definition of nice to a Long Islander is as few black people as possible, and to get them from these to their jobs in Manhattan. For all other purposes, they drive. So there's currently no integration with other kinds of mass transit. The line, that immortal line that I keep quoting about how commuter rail is not mass transit, is its own thing, that did not come from the LIRR, that came from the former head of the MBTA, but the LIRR has always believed that. They came up with this idea. It's actually, I think it was an invention of the New York Central, I think, before it became Metro North, of zonal expresses. The idea is that trains make a handful of stops in the suburbs, only as many as needed to fill the train. They don't go very frequently, and then they express to Manhattan. And the idea is, and there's a technical argument from the 60s about why it makes this more efficient. For example, the fare zones, instead of having fares very continuously by distance, all the stations in a zone have the same fare. So it simplifies the ticket collector's job. They still have ticket collectors because because in the 2020s you see labor costs in the New York region are very low, and therefore it's fine to have many supernumeraries on each train. And likewise, there's no real attempt at connections between the suburbs. In the same era, in the 60s, we're transitioning to these zonal expresses. They also considered a positive that they were letting go of the ability to take to carry passengers on what was called short trips. A short trip, for in American commuter rail parlance, is a trip that does not stop. Sorry, it's a trip that is short of city center. So it's not defined by number of stops. So a trip from somewhere very far out, like, I don't know, from Ronkonkoma or something, that goes up to, let's say, Mineola. That is a short trip, even though it's objectively very long, longer, in fact, than Mineola to Manhattan. And this was kind of a simplification. They were trying to let go of the trips that were just weird to them. Not necessarily because these trips were less profitable. If anything, these trips are more profitable. It creates more turnover it creates more seat turnover. It does not congest the most congested part of the route. In the same way that I think highway builders understand that the equivalent of a short trip on a highway, that is to say, when a driver uses a freeway but does not enter city center or does not enter any of the other nodes of maximum congestion, this is a positive for the road network. The road builders don't actually like spending money on roads that are only full on on a short section entering city center, and only during rush hour. They think it's a waste of money. Now, local politicians tend to like the waste of money because those wastes of money make them feel important. But the road building in America, back when it was a big thing, in the middle of the 20th century, was run by technocrats. The technocrats of the Bureau of Public Roads, in fact, inspired technocrats in other countries. For example, Trafikverket in Sweden was explicitly modeled after the Bureau of Public Roads, except that it was not a purely road age. I mean, not Trafikverket as it is, the forerunners of Trafikverket. Every generation they reorganize, but that's not just the roads. The trains in Sweden are run on the same model. These are technocrats who don't like spending money. They like it when or rather, they don't like spending money for nothing. They like spending money for creating more road traffic. If they're road builders, and they think that building more roads is good and driving more is good. And likewise, they like short trips. This is what you would expect of a rational railway, but these were not rational people. These were people who were succumbing to their own biases. The manager who invented the zonal express for the New York City for New York Central as the foreigner of Metro North, specifically contrasted that approach with the short trips enabled by the subway. This is again 1950s and 60s suburbanites. They hate the city. They hate the subway. They left the city for a reason. That reason might not even be black people in Westchester. I think Westchester, the fastest decade of growth in absolute numbers, not percentage, which would be, I guess, when a person first set foot there, which would have been, I guess, I don't know, 11,000 years ago or something. Um, but in absolute numbers, the greatest growth in Westchester was in the 1920s. This is snootier people than Long Island. The Long Islanders are only afraid of black people. The people who founded the early towns of the early suburbs in Westchester and Fairfield County, they thought Jews and Italians were too swarthy. Darien still is like that. And so and so I bring this up because out of irrationality, they favored this operating pattern, and this pattern does need to be reformed. How? By just taking it to like normal non-North American commuter rail standards. So urban trips, rather like the subway, which is something that unfortunately New York suburbanites gag at the suggestion of. Um, in Boston, by the way, Boston has had its own racially contentious history of suburbanization. For example, there were rocks thrown at school buses because the uh, white people of South Boston, who have since white fled to Quincy and Braintree, did not want school integration. But in Boston, somehow, despite that history, the idea of saying this my experience of Boston suburbanites is that they don't gag when you say like the subway, and New York suburbanites do, and that has been a problem. Um, but but the point is that um, if this is done, there's more integration with other mass transit, which, for the record, they're very slowly moving toward that. I mean, they're talking about something like city tickets. So the idea is that they're not going to change the timetables, but they are going to let city residents ride within the city at reduced price. I think it's still much higher than subway fare, but lower than before because they think of it incrementally and not in terms of fare integration. Um, which is kind of weird because the same people are proposing fare integration for city ticket, also proposed fare disintegration for free buses in New York, keeping the subway not free because they favor free transit. They just think it's politically an easier ask to just start with the buses, so breaking fare integration, which is like worse than status quo. And I'm not saying worse than status quo as in worse than investing the money in something else. No, it's worse than not spending the money. It's like it's spending money that is increasing the subsidy for public transit by reducing fares, and also making the system worse. But anyway, um, yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Uh, it's not just because the foreigners were over the ocean. Because remember that Paris, for example, first of all, is in a very racist country. Paris is more racially diverse than a number of American cities at this point, and I don't mean random villages in Vermont. I mean, there are more people of color as a proportion. Paris is something like 30, maybe 33% people of color. And yeah, there are big American cities that are like, I think Boston is about that. Maybe it's even wider. Seattle, maybe. Um, and in Paris, that's absolutely, and it's not because Paris is somehow less racist, but in Paris, it doesn't actually color how they're doing infrastructure planning. Essentially, they're sufficiently technocratic that they don't give a shit. Um, but anyway, so with Long Island, this actually makes Long Island somewhat easier. Metro North as well. But easier, I mean easier to modernize, just because um, it's just easier to modernize something that is less modern. Um, it's like it's the equivalent of in how to explain it. It's easier for me to go into like an American transit agency and tell them what to do and suggest suggest big improvements than for me to do the same for a German one, because Germany is already more modern. Oh, perfect, but more modern. And Long Island is unusually unmodernized in this regard. Um, but this is still something that's going to have to interface with intercity trains from the Northeast Corridor, and that's really hard. Like, there are actually hard technical things here, which is why this is not just some kind of way to improve racial integration in downstate New York. It is really a technical matter that is necessary in order to make public transportation run more smoothly. Um, Otherwise, there would not need to be that much attention to the LIRR. Just cut the subsidies. If the trains need to stop running, that's fine. Property values of the people here are not the social concern. They can move back to the city if they want. But again, this is something that's actually necessary as a matter of making the intercity rail go more smoothly. And the upshot is that the LIRR has very little interface with the Northeast Corridor, just here, and of course through running. So, a lot of the ways that we need to think about this are all about making things easier. You take a hard problem and you break it down into easier things and into easier parts. This is how tech works, for example. There's a banner that I saw. I think maybe it was XKCD. It was actually, it might have been a few XKCDs ago. Let me check. Not this, not this, not this. No, no. Okay, it may not have been XKCD. But there was this line, I think, on Mastodon. We don't do this because it is easy, but because we thought it was going to be easy. And yeah, quite a lot of technical things, and I don't just mean software tech. I mean, math papers work the exact same way. I mean, proving a theorem looks impossibly hard. It's not working. Proving a theorem looks impossibly hard, but then you break it down into steps, each of which is tractable. And if it's a really hard theorem, maybe you need to spend months on that. Maybe you need to involve someone with a different skill set from your, or someone who's familiar with different theories from you. You need to read other papers of this, and then after a couple months of this work, you're proving a theorem and you're publishing a paper. Or sorry, you're uploading a paper onto the archive, the part where the paper gets published. Math has some horrifically long lead times between when a paper is completed and when it will appear in print. Can be a year, could be more than a year. And to be very clear, this is not because the proofs are incorrect, and very little of that is because reviewer number 2 is annoyed that their paper was not referenced. But anyway, so we're gonna simplify. How are we gonna simplify? There are a bunch of ways to simplify. First of all, we use clock face planning, clock face schedules. This means we plan 1 hour and repeat it the entire day. Or rather, we plan 1 peak hour and repeat it the entire day, and point out places where you can remove every other train for off-peak. For off-peak, just because the LIRR. So I said at the start of the video, right? I mean, if you're running a train every 15 minutes at rush hour, and it's not connecting cities that are very far away, you should probably keep running it every 15 minutes off peak as well. And I gave the example of Boston to Providence. This is a trip that not by the present day trains, which are very slow, take an hour, I think take about an hour 10, the commuter trains, but actually fast, still making all the stops, but electrified trains, electric multiple units, they would do it in about 47 minutes. So that should be every 15 minutes all day, most likely. But you don't need to run every 10 minutes off peak. Not that not when trains take that long. Every 15, 20 can be done. Even every 30, every 30 is not going to be the end of the world. Every hour, kind of, and the present system of every 2 hours uh, is you might as well not run it. You might as well. I shouldn't say you might as well not run the trains. People do ride them. I would ride them when I was in Providence, but you're not going to serve riders meaningfully that way. And the point is that the LIRR trunk. So right now, all the LIRR lines combined feed about 37 trains per hour into Penn Station. LIRR trains are cleaner, yeah, fewer people use them, and more comfortable. That depends. This really depends, and for example, it depends on whether you have to stand. So the LIRR is priced premium, so there aren't usually standees, but when there are standees, it's less comfortable than on the subway. And on commuter trains that are less subway, so the LIRR is kind of weird in that it runs almost subway style rolling stock. So it has fewer doors, and it has more seats and less standing space, but it still has, for example, large vestibules where where it's relatively comfortable to stand. This is not the case, for example, for the New Jersey Transit rolling stock, or for the MBTA rolling stock. And in fact, and something that was pointed out on my Discord either today or yesterday, that the early EMUs in the LIR, so the M1s and the M3s, the M1 Metropolitans were literally designed to look like that era's new subway trains, which I think were the R44, R46 trains, but I'm not sure. So I will say that the comfort levels, again, it depends on whether you are standing or sitting. The standing comfort on the LIR is not great. It is better than, or Metro North, same thing. It is on both better than on other American commuter trains, which have very little standing space. You have to stand in the corridor between the seats, and there isn't a lot of space when it's 2-3, especially when it's bi-level and it's just very cramped. Now, can you do every 15-minute trains on the LIR? I mean, on the LIR every 15 minutes, I mean, why not? I mean, like the place where you need a lot of frequency is mostly in and just outside the city, and FYI, many more. I mean, New York to Jamaica is roughly. It's not on a consistent talk, and this needs to be fixed, but it's about 7 trains per hour maybe between Penn Station and Jamaica. I mean, people do that all the time to get to the airport. And it's just that these trains skip Forest Hills and Kew Gardens, and usually also Woodside. So it's stuff like more local service to places like Forest Hills, Kew Gardens, all the stops up to Floral Park, the Southeast Queens stops out down to Rosedale. And this is entirely possible. So the point is to try to separate the systems as much as possible. That's the second thing. When I say systems, I mean LIR from the rest. And so use tucked planning. And the same thing that I showcased in the video about Boston, Philly, DC. That was essentially just about patterns that repeat every hour, or every half hour. In the case of Boston to Providence, every 15 minutes. And it's the same here. You plan 1 hour, you repeat it all day. If it's stupid to run this much off-peak service, and again, every 15 minutes isn't stupid. New York to Jamaica needs to be like these stations need every 10 I would groan. Every 5 is good. Every 7.5 maybe. Every 10 I would groan. Every 15 is bad. Every 20 you might as well not run. And they run. And currently, I believe Forest Hills and Kew Gardens are served hourly each. The trains are empty, right. The trains are empty because they charge horrific fares. If you are around here, you have the option of taking the LIRR, it's only to Penn Station, it charges very high fares, it is infrequent, or you take the subway, which is slower, but charges lower fares, is much more frequent, and doesn't charge you a second fare if you need to change to another train. This is why you do fare integration. Um, that's how you make the trains stop being empty off-peak. And this is especially bad given how um, so much of the stuff feeding the subway east of Queens or east of Flushing is buses that are either literally parallel to the LIRR or could more efficiently hit an LIRR station. But they don't because the LIRR is incredibly infrequent. So the bus feeders, for example, are not designed around, let's say, running north-south to feed Hollis. They're instead diverting to much more congested areas to feed Jamaica, or maybe to feed 179th. So here. Or maybe to feed Flushing Main Street on the 7. That is the problem. Yeah, or you can do things like you could do things like peak off peak fares, like the lower priced. So there's often a thing here. I don't think. Yeah, so bear in mind that for 300, even before the €9 monthlies, I mean you could. So remember you could get every train in Berlin. For it used to be €86 a month, and now it's 29 because they're trying to because the we have our own free transit trolls. They're just more competent than the American ones, so they're not disintegrating the fares; they're just cutting the fares. And in the suburbs, so the entire reach of the S-Bahn plus every regional train in the S-Bahn area. Steffi, do you remember the ABC ticket price? Is it like 100? And you can check. What the ABC monthly is. Tickets, BFG. Yeah, London also doesn't have bus rail fare integration, which is not a great idea. They're trying to in London. They're trying to yeet people. Wait, why do you not have the €29 ticket? Right now, for a whole day, season tickets, monthly. What is ABC? 107. Yeah. Yeah. So doesn't quite get you to very far out suburbs that are past the S-Bahn. I think for that it's like 150 or 200. Yeah, the bus fare in London is lower than the rail fare is the point. And here it's not. Um, in New York City, it's not if you pretend the commuter trains don't exist. Uh, you have the old stuff. Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay. Yeah, it used to be 86, and now it's 29. But anyway, they're negotiating to make it 49 nationwide, to do the €9 ticket, but 49 on every regional train and bus and tram, everything except intercities. But anyway, the point is that you do need to do this kind of integration, but it's somehow you need to also make sure that the trains don't mock the intercities. So how do you do that? So when you try to do through running, and you do need to do through running on the New Jersey side, as far as possible, so remember, New York to New Haven is already going to be entangled with everything because there are intercity trains here. So keep that specific entanglement. So this is why I keep saying that every Penn Station access train, so every New York to New Haven train that diverts to Penn Station, should continue to Jersey. And then I would argue that the LIRR train that goes to Jersey should be the Port Washington branch. Now, this is not. There are many ways in which this is not the greatest pairing of lines, and probably the most important is that it means that there's no through service from Jamaica to New Jersey. London public transport, it depends on which parts of it. The underground before Corona, the underground operationally broke even. And likewise here, I don't know about now with the 29, certainly not now with the €29, but the U-Bahn broke even. I think also in Munich. Yeah, right. The point is that Berlin would break even without these ticket fares. Essentially, London has a problem where there are too many lines to the west and not enough to the east. So the trains are overcrowded, but also ridership per route kilometer is very low. Um, but um, but yeah, no. New York just has New York has very high operating costs, unlike Berlin or London or Paris. But anyway, the point is that for the LIRR, um, so I'd like to to argue, and this is where I probably need to show my crayon, or at least elements of my crayon. This one. Um, this is 6-line crayon, uh, and I've been so when I say what should throw on when I'm talking about intercity rail integration, you really need to be thinking all in terms of lines 1, 2, and 3. 1 is red, 2 is blue, 3 sorry, 1 is red, 2 is green, 3 is orange, 4 is blue, 5 is yellow, 7 is purple. Um, so this is a tunnel that does not exist. It would cost money to build it. This is a tunnel that does not exist, would also cost money to build. Such a long underwater tunnel. This is about to open. This is East Side Access. This does not exist. Hoboken to Grand Central. Line 1 entirely exists. This is the old tunnels to Penn Station, and then existing lines to Penn Station access and the LIRR. Line 2 is Gateway plus connection to Grand Central. Line 3 requires a little bit of realignment. The issue is that this line exists, but there are sections that are single track, and also it enters the wrong part of Penn Station, competing for track space with other lines, whereas it can be realigned to other tracks. So this is a tunnel, but a short tunnel. When I'm talking about integration, I'm really talking about these 3 lines. And by the way, I'm aware that Gateway is not supposed to follow this exact alignment, but is instead going to be somewhat separated. So imagine the green line should actually be more like this. I'm not going to do the edits right now, but this is roughly the alignment. Also, Bergen Line Avenue would be shifted a little bit. And I'd like to explain. Yeah, the 1 is reliable. The 1 is a very reliable train. For some reason, it's more crowded than it should be after hours. By after hours, I mean midnight. I mean like 8, 9 in the evening. Uh, but yeah, so the rolling stock is easy. But yeah, I tried to explain how threading should be done, and the issue is that you need to choose which lines go where. One of the things that I'm saying is that to make things simpler, be consistent. So here I'm consistent in that you can see that there are, in a more expansive system, LIRR lines that always go to Lower Manhattan, LIRR lines that always go to Grand Central Inside Access, LIRR lines that always go to Penn Station. This is how it should be. I mean, the Lower Manhattan thing may not yet exist, so what you should do is instead permanently pair certain branches with the East Side Access Tunnel, others with Penn Station, and yet other and remember there are 4 tracks entering Penn Station, so some should throw on, some should initially not, and then be realigned to the Empire connection, and some should be going to Brooklyn. Probably the best thing to go to Brooklyn is is initially at least just these 2 branches. This is entering Manhattan. This is entering Jamaica from a different route, and could pretend to be an orange line until this tunnel is built. And I'd like to explain why for a moment. So as I said, this kind of pairing has a problem, which is that there's no direct connection from anywhere in Jersey except the Erie Line system, which again, until this tunnel opens, is not part of anything, and Jamaica. So you don't have Newark to Jamaica trips, or rather you do, but you need to transfer, which defeats much of the purpose of through running. What do you mean orange or purple? Court, what do you mean by orange or purple? Oh, you mean the Montauk line, the Babylon branch? Probably has to be orange and not purple, and the reason is that this fills an entire double track at rush hour. These two lines, it's about 20-ish trains per hour. There's not going to be room for this, whereas this is going to have a lot of spare space. And this also means that the Babylon branch would get the local trains. But I mean, what can you do? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, the line that runs to Penn is orange. Purple is East Side Access. So I keep talking about how to remove complexity, and it's kind of a de-interlining. I mean, you don't ever fully de-interline commuter rail. The RER is not fully de-interlined. The S-Bahn isn't. Now I think both should, but they're not yet. But they're not there. Tokyo has a bunch of reverse branching in its commuter rail network, and I don't just mean the running to the subway. And yeah, these are things that probably should be fixed, but it's a long-term project to do so. London, same thing. London has a lot of reverse branching that they're trying to reduce, but it is taking a while. So here's how you reduce the extent of reverse branching, and this makes the system more reliable. It also means you can more easily timetable aspects of it separately. Again, some things, probably the Atlantic lines, so this so Far Rockaway and Long Beach should just be running to Brooklyn. People can change to Jamaica. Then the main line, so this means the trains to Ronkonkoma and the trains to it's to Huntington, and then this needs to be electrified, and then to Port Jeff, should only run to East Side Access. So what this means, yeah, de-interlining means that instead of having a normal branch is when you have trains that you have different lines that share tracks in the core and then split past the core. Let's say you have a bunch of different stopping patterns on the New Haven line, the Harlem line, the Hudson line, and then Metro North today, they all merge on these 4 tracks from Harlem to Grand Central. That's normal. That's normal branching. Not all, like every commuter rail system has these. Some subways do, some don't. But that's pretty normal. Reverse branching is when you have trains that share tracks not in the core and then don't share tracks and then split to different things in the core. So as an example, on the Queens Boulevard line of the subway, you have the E and F trains which share tracks from Forest Hills, sort of even past Forest Hills, as they go in Queens, but then the E train goes to Manhattan via 53rd Street Tunnel and the F train via 63rd Street Tunnel. This is reverse branching, or interlining. De-interlining means eliminating this reverse branching. There are, I think, 8 such points on the subway where there is reverse branching. And again, reverse branching is very common. Is very common on complex commuter rail systems, but even there, work is being done to reduce it, just because it does make the schedules more fragile. It reduces capacity. It makes it harder to plan the system for the long term. And planner resources are real resources that need to be optimized for. When you don't do that, you get the situation of the subway, where there are about 300 people in operations planning, and they still write timetables where the trains run into each other. Or if not, where the trains are separated by the wrong amount of time, and therefore they don't really run frequently on shared trunks, for example. Because they make so many competing demands of those 300 people that those 300 people can't write an actually workable schedule. So to write a workable schedule, again, tact. You do 1 hour, you're repeated all day. Yeah, you can have less service in the off-peak, but the less service needs to be essentially things that are taken off regularly, like maybe every other train, from the rush hour schedule. And again, this is fine here just because the rush hour schedule, remember, between Hicksville, on what I'm drawing is the purple line, so Port Jeff and Ronkonkoma, and ignore this is Oyster Bay, has approximately zero ridership. These trains have something like 20 trains, like would run something like 20 trains per hour, or 22 trains per hour on the system. And so if you're running every, let's say, 2.5 minutes peak, you don't need to run every 2.5 minutes off peak. Again, every 5 is fine. And so the point is that you want to take this system, especially something that is this busy, and just separate it from everything else. How do you do so? You create a situation in which past Hicksville, all the trains are identical. What I mean by identical is they make all the stops. This is something that bothers a lot of Long Islanders who prefer express trains, and then, yeah, you have these trains that skip a couple stops, but all these extra couple stops they skip, yeah, they save 5 minutes or something. But the timetabling is so fragile that normally you add 7% buffer time or 7% pad time, the LIR adds 30%. You look at the, no, seriously, you look at the present day acceleration capabilities of the trains which have been derated, and even relative to these capabilities, and even relative to to actual speed limits, which could be raised in many places, the actual trip times are 30. The actual trip times, they're 30% longer than the technical travel time. Normally, again, it's 7%. Like in Germany, in Germany, the intercity trains are padded 25%, and this is a scandal. So these trains, so it's kind of a weird thing where more local trains would be faster than more express trains because the express trains are really complex, and so a lot of buffer time is needed in case they miss their specific slots, because the whole point is that these trains only make a couple stops, and then you see what the problem is. They're not substitutable for each other, and so to make sure that they arrive in a certain sequence, there needs to be a lot of padding in the schedule. And then if you instead create a situation in which past Hicksville all trains on this combined system are identical, they just make all these stops. So let me change to this because there's some info that I don't want to deal with right now. So you have these stops past Hicksville. They do Westbury, Carl Place, Mineola, Maryland Avenue, New Hyde Park, add a stop at Flower Park for this connection, and then, yeah, they can express to, let's say, Jamaica, then add a stop here at Sunnyside Junction, and then Grand Central. They all make the same stops. They're they're substitutable for each other. It's kind of a weird thing where the trains are going to make more stops than the present day train that does non-stop Ronkonkoma to Penn Station, and they're still going to do it faster, just because the timetables are better. This is a really weird thing, but when you're padding 30%, something is really weird with what you're something is really weird with how you're timetabling them. Yeah, I mean, better reliability than Deutsche Bahn is not that hard to achieve. The fact that the American trains don't achieve that is a separate problem. But the TGVs are padded 11%, like between 10 and 13%. And yeah, exactly. And this is why you want to simplify. Again, you want to do a tucked and actually stick with the tucked and not constantly fidget with it, so that you can actually take the time to write a good timetable and not have less time. So you write timetables for with trains that have really weird gaps between them, and then they get to and then they constantly miss merge points, and you need to slow them down to make them stay on schedule. And so this is, and so that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, also separate the trains from each other as much as possible. This means these trains essentially run the express tracks from Floral Park to Grand Central. You do not use the third track. This is a two-track. This was a two-track line, so the trains ran one way because they didn't care about reverse peak service. and at rush hour. And so they at a great expense built a third track here, which they said would permit them to run reverse peak service. No, it doesn't. It permits them to run express service, and don't actually use that line. It's going to bother a lot of people that the line is not being used, but this line is not actually in any way useful for any kind of modern commuter rail operations. Um, and therefore it should not be used. Yes, it is wasted money. It's going to be very blatant that the money was wasted. Assume that every single piece of infrastructure built for commuter rail in America is a waste of money. Even the ones that are sometimes that are useful, like Penn Station access, are at 10x markup, sometimes more. So this essentially blocks this entire part of the system from ever needing to deal with any kind of through running until maybe this opens, but this is far future. Can I explain like U5? Yeah, it's, as I said, it's that when the trains, when the timetables are too complex, there are more opportunities for delays to cascade. This is also a big problem on the subway where I don't know if this is going to show you. Maybe let's do track maps for a moment. I think this is the right one. Yeah, okay. So Manhattan to Brooklyn, there's the Manhattan Bridge. 6th Avenue feeds BD, Broadway feeds NQ. Then, once they're in Brooklyn, they split on this horrific junction, where instead of being paired B and D and then N and Q, past the junction, they're paired as at D cab and point south, it's B and Q. These use the express tracks, which uniquely for New York are on the outside here. And then these trains continue on this line. It's under Flatbush, and briefly shares right of way but no stations with the 2, 3, 4, 5. And the other is the N and D, which don't even stop at this express stop. And then they become the express trains on 4th Avenue, where the R runs local. This this as again an example of reverse branching because the B and Q share tracks in Brooklyn, but not in Manhattan, and the same is true of D and N trains. This kind of split and recombination means that a delay on the B train will potentially affect all the other three, and this means that essentially the magnitude of delays is increased because instead of a train delaying trains on the same line, a train is going to delay trains on other lines as well. So if the initial number of delays is the same, if the delay propagates to another line, in practice you're going to get twice as many delays. Here, the splitting and recombination is so difficult that we have to have a camera here connect with the control center so they can just tell drivers to stop. This setup delays the trains by 2 minutes. This is so the first problem is it just makes things slower and more delayed. Second, because they're more delayed, you can't put in as many trains on the tracks because the limiting factor is often delays and not literal stopping distances. In London, for example, they've found that the Northern Line, the one that has the worst reverse branching, the deep one that has the worst reverse branching because the subsurface system has worse with how the Circle Line used to run and to some extent still runs. In London, the Northern Line used to be two. So the Northern Line has 2 trunks, both of which are called the Northern Line. One is called the Bank Branch. One is called the Bank Branch. It is this one. It goes via Bank, and I'm sorry about the color scheme of OpenStreetMaps that makes subways blend into, or Open Railway Map that makes subways blend into the street network. They should just get better coloring schemes, to be honest. And the other is goes by Tottenham Court Road and is called the and it is called the Charing Cross branch. I think there is a map here that is geographically accurate. Yes, this one. Now, so the four most crowded segments of the London Underground are the Central Line from the east to the center. I'm telling you what the crowded things are in the morning, reverse it for the afternoon. So it's this, the Victoria Line between Victoria Station, where a lot of trains get dumped into points north. So here, the Waterloo and City Line, which is just two station line connecting Waterloo and Bank, and I don't remember which direction, I think from the south toward Bank. This is an extremely peaky area because this is the very traditional central business district. So lots of finance, especially, and the result is that it's extremely 9 to 5 here. So this is where you have a very sharp peak. Bank is not actually the busiest station in the system in London. So the busiest stations are train stations. Just because people get off the commuter trains or the intercity trains there and then transfer to the tube. Not counting these, the busiest station is actually not Bank. Bank is number 2. The busiest is this one, this three-way connection called Oxford Circus. But Bank is much peakier. Bank might possibly be busier on weekdays. Weekends, Oxford Circus is far ahead. I don't think Bank is even number 2 on weekends. And so what they're doing, and one of the problems is they could only shove, I think, 28 trains per hour into Bank. And the reason is that the presence of two trunks and the branches to the north and to the south would use both of these central trunks, created too much dependency, and it was not possible to do more than 28. Meanwhile, the Victoria line is 36. The central is, I think, 35. So, that would be nice. This. The north now. Steph says the Northern Line really must be split into two, and it should not be an earth-shattering observation that because the people who run TfL actually know what they're doing, they know that already. So this little stub of an extension just opened, I think maybe 2 years ago, and this is supposed to be permanently paired with Charing Cross, so that Morden is permanently paired with Bank, and this is supposed to improve throughput to Bank to 32 trains per hour. Now, there's also a plan to permanently pair, I think it's the western branch, so Edgware with Bank, and the eastern one, so High Barnet and Mill Hill East with Charing Cross. But it could be the other way around, I'm not sure. Right now, again, both go to both. The problem is that you might be able to tell there's a thickness here. The transfer station between these is not cross-platform, so they need to build more passageways to increase circulation. When that is done, they believe that on the remaining Bank system, which again I think is going to be Edgware, Edgware, Bank, Morden, they can do 36. This is really important just for throughput. So capacity. So getting more passengers where they want to go. New York has not done this. And I'm pointing out how there's so much train schedule padding on the LIRR because it's not just a little bit of reverse branching like this. It's like these really complex express patterns. It's not just express and local trains. They're zonal expresses. By the way, there's less of that on the south side. Here they just don't have space, so they do this weird zonal system where it's I think the trains make 3 stops, then skip 3 stops, then make 3 stops, then skip 3 stops, or something like that. Which is really weird, but is somehow on average the trains are the same speed, whereas here they're not. So there's worse padding here than here, and because of that, it's better to just make this its own independent system where these trains run. Again, they make all these stops from Floral Park. They should run express, stopping at Jamaica, of course, and then only getting to Grand Central. So that is permanently what goes to Grand Central, and that largely de-interlines the LIR. Now, what needs to happen for that? A few things. First of all, Floral Park currently is a flat junction. Because it's a flat junction, there are grade conflicts between inbound trains coming from the branch coming from Hempstead and outbound trains through the main line. Just grade separate this. It requires money, but it doesn't require extraordinarily large amounts of money. More complex junctions are currently costed at maybe, I think, 250 or 300, like Hunter. So grade separate this. Also make sure that the rebuilt station can have express tracks as well. So express platforms as well, so that this is the transfer point. This is the transfer point between trains from farther out, between passengers from farther out, and the intermediate stops, in addition to Jamaica. Then this station needs to be opened, and this is something that keeps not happening, unfortunately. And oh fuck. Yeah. Thameslink also has express trains. It's just that Thameslink. There are certain weird things about Thameslink, I will say, which is mostly the fact that in London, I think it's more south and north. Like the lines to the north are all 4-track for the most part, so it's so they have slow tracks and fast tracks, and you just throw on the slow tracks. And for example, Crossrail is slow tracks of the Great Western and slow tracks of the Great Eastern, I think. Paris is essentially the same. And then everything involving South London and also, exceptionally for North London, the Lee Valley lines. Instead of having 4-track mains, there are two closely spaced 2-track mains. The idea is that when they needed more space, instead of widening the line to 4 tracks, they built a bypass 2-track line, and then they filled that line with stops. So both lines have local stops. So this is the problem here. It's very common in South London. So the express patterns are just get really weird in London. This is something that New York doesn't have. In New York, the trunks are 4-track, and then they drop to 2 tracks as they enter Manhattan. To grossly oversimplify. So fix the flat junction and then build Sunnyside Junction. Why is Sunnyside Junction important? Well, you see, there's going to be Penn Station Access. This is a project that's going to open in a couple of years. I don't remember when. But it is going to open, as I understand it. With fewer stops than I'm portraying, because Astoria was descoped because there are real construction difficulties there. It's on a grade and kind of a dense environment, but also they assumed very high fares and low off-peak frequencies and found, lo and behold, low ridership because people can take the subway. Now, if you provide the same fares as the subway, then people are going to fill the trains if they run at any frequency. Okay, I shouldn't say at any frequency. I mean figuratively, if they run at even semi-decent frequency, like every 10, 15 minutes. They're already going to start seeing riders. So lots of people are going to go from the New Haven line, from all the New Haven line stations, or also from the Bronx to Penn Station on Penn Station Access. A bunch of people are going to go from Long Island to Grand Central. So why not provide a station where they can transfer across platform? There is a stretch where this is viable. I think the location that I drew on this map is the eastern margin of where it is feasible. So I think this is roughly accurate of where the East Side Access Tunnel begins. So you have not actually that much of a leeway. It's like about 700 meters or so where you could put the station, and the station would be something like 300 of them. And but this should be built. This does require doing some work on moving the tracks, but not that much. I mean, the tracks are not, for the most part, the place where I think the way the platforms are set up right now is that in one direction the platform would just go in existing gaps, and in another you would need to move the tracks to move one track, but there's space to move it to, because you see there are gaps here. There is a lot of space. Which is money, but again, it's not that much money to build an infill station, even in a constrained environment. Which this absolutely is. This is 20, 30 million, with a little bit of a premium for the constrained environment, 50 would be too much, I think, to build this. Or rather, let's assign it to 30 million, maybe a bit more to build the station because it's very long platforms, 30, 35, maybe 40 in the year of expenditure dollars, and then a little bit of prep work. That is not that expensive for such a major station. The problem is if people hear major station, then everyone is going to want some signature shit, and everyone's going to want some. Everyone is essentially going to want to make it more expensive just because it makes them feel important that the station is more expensive, which is fine. All of these, remember, I don't want to call them NIMBYs because there's not people who are against development, but these are people who are the same kind of very small-minded local powers that usually are NIMBY, but here they are trying to grab money. All of these are ignorable. They don't actually have that much power. When the state says we will do something, the state can actually just defeat them rather easily. They did this in California against way more powerful people than anyone who lives here. And California has a very NIMBY empowering court system. It didn't matter. When the state, I mean, people don't actually get how powerful the state is. Mostly, I think it's because politicians say we can't as an excuse when what they mean is we won't. Or they do bullshit proof of work, which is the same thing. And anyway, so you build this, and the reason you build this is that so that the red trains and the purple trains note with the system. Remember how I said purple is line 6? This means that Woodside doesn't get any purple trains. They express from Jamaica to Sunnyside. So you get a cross-platform transfer from the red trains to the purple trains in my color scheme. And this way you have this purple line, which is completely separated from everything else. Because the transfer points, so Sunnyside and Jamaica, are going to be where there's going to be a lot of frequency, you probably don't even need to time them. The LIR does time transfers at Jamaica quite often, but this would not even be necessary just because the frequency is going to be so high. This means that the delays on the system will not touch any other part of the system. So this is how you can separate parts of the LIR from everything else, and this means that figuring out how the LIR fits into through running becomes so much easier because you don't need to constantly think about how a delay in Syosset or a delay in Brentwood is going to propagate to New Jersey, because it's not. And this is with through running. It's just that this line won't. Other lines will. And again, I keep saying that you should start by through running Penn Station access just because it's easiest to do Northeast Corridor to Northeast Corridor. This is also not LIRR. Within the LIRR, I keep saying Port Washington just because it's the one that is least connected with the rest of the system. Again, you want to separate the systems as much as possible. Through running is very useful for cross-city trips, but I mean, there's nothing about through running that says that Newark has to be connected with Jamaica in preference to Flushing. In fact, Jamaica as a job center is not growing. Jamaica is the historic center of Queens, but like a lot of the historic secondary centers, it has been in like a century-long decline. The growth, and this is also, by the way, true of downtown Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn used to be far and away the most important non-Manhattan job center in New York City. It isn't even clearly number 2 at this point. Like number 2, like outside Manhattan, the biggest are downtown Brooklyn and Long Island City. Whichever is bigger is unclear. It depends on this. Okay, this is just a different map. This is just a matter of the main site that does the job counts on the map, kind of derping out when it comes to public sector workers. I believe every teacher in Brooklyn or something like that is deemed to be working out of Borough Hall in Brooklyn. And this makes downtown Brooklyn look bigger than it is. You omit that specific building, Long Island City is bigger, but people still work there, so it's unclear. I'll get to this in the suck stuff. So the point is that it's actually important to have stops serving Long Island City. Sunnyside is not the best location. The job density peaks well to the west of this. Let me see if I actually put this in V3 or something, which it adds a seventh line. I guess no, the answer is no, it doesn't. There are perennial plans to add an infill stop here, so not good enough for East Side access, but only for Penn Station bound trains, usually called Sunnyside, at Queens Boulevard. This is actually very good access to all these Long Island City jobs at Queensboro Plaza. Unfortunately, no subway access, although honestly they can open an infill stop on the 7. It's above ground. There's lots of, actually there's lots of space because lots of rail tracks, but there is going to be space to set this up. So you're going to get connections between Newark and Long Island City, which is by far the biggest job center in Queens. I think at this point Jamaica isn't even number 2. Number 2 I think is Flushing. I think it goes Long Island City, then Flushing, then Jamaica, then the airport. Now obviously you're losing the airport connection. If you don't do Newark to Jamaica, this is a genuine problem, but the main purpose of the trains is not to get people to the airport, thank you very much. It is one purpose, but not the only one. And not the primary one. And so this is why I keep arguing for a system that, to be very clear, breaks Jamaica to Jersey. Unless, again, you're talking about line 5 or line 7 or something, and these are speculative. We're talking about through running that works for lines 1, 2, and 3, or 1 and 2. So this means that essentially all questions about connection to the intercity trains in the sequel are just really about one part of the LIRR, and that part is the Port Washington branch. And this is actually the easiest thing to do. Why? The Port Washington branch is the most urban of the branches. Now, other branches have a lot of urban service. The main line does go through essentially parallel to the Queens Boulevard line. The Atlantic goes through, is essentially parallel. Half of it is parallel to the Fulton Street line, the other half to somewhere between Fulton Street and Jamaica, which actually work really well as an express version. And when I say express version, I mean with these stops as express versions of the subway. But the point is that maybe this is also very urban, but the branching structure is such that you always need to worry about what happens well past the city. And Port Washington, just look at what's in Port Washington, on the Port Washington branch outside the city. High ridership doesn't come from this land use. As it is, I'm forgetting the exact numbers. I can try to get them from tables published by the LR today, but by Patrick Hara, but these golf courses right next to the, like at this point it's right next to the train station, model TOD, right here. Not a lot of ridership comes out of here, and it's actually important because this is single track, so essentially it means you don't care about what happens past Great Neck. The trains will be timetabled on the single track based on how they can fit in on the tracks and not based on the needs of Port Washington. But here there's actually a lot of potential ridership. It's really important to help decongest the 7. To work with the buses better. Again, a lot of buses just divert to Flushing, which is more congested, instead of going, let's say, Bay Terrace to Bayside, and then have people take the LIRR to Manhattan. And actually, so at one point, Bayside was the busiest LIRR stop. It's still rather busy. It might be the busiest in the city, I'm not sure. Sorry, busiest in the city that's not, Penn Station, Jamaica, downtown Brooklyn. So this is so this is such an urban line that you just think in terms of repeating timetables. What is the repeating timetable? Every 5 minutes peak, every 10 minutes peak. I can even make an argument for keeping parts of it every 5 loaf peak. I'm not suggesting, I'm saying, but it can be argued. Right now, the trains run every 10 minutes peak, less than that off peak. But remember, cut the fares, and even at rush hour, you're going to see so much more ridership out of just making it more useful. And this is also a bunch of info stops. So essentially, this means that everything that happens on the northeast corridor has to alternate with trains, with urban trains running every 5 minutes. Note a few things. These trains don't have identities. Sorry. On the single track, they have to, but once they get here, they stop having their own identity, and this means they can be moved by 1 or 2 minutes, and this simplifies the question of how to recover from delays. In this way, it's kind of interesting that you can make these long-distance intercity trains share tracks with very urban trains, or not with urban trains making stops on the shared trunk. No, the stops that I'm suggesting on the shared trunk here are Sunnyside, which even has extra tracks for non-stop trains, and then the trains are just going to end. Same would be if there's a Sunnyside station here, and then just Penn Station. So it's not so. So the issue here is not slotting faster and slower trains on the same tracks. It's slotting trains on the same track that, certainly on the tunnel, run at the same speed, and then when they split, one of them becomes an intercity train to Boston, and the other becomes a fundamentally urban train that just, like an S-Bahn train, just happens to run a little bit into the suburbs, as is common for S-Bahn trains. And this actually is a really good pairing because the intercity trains are, especially when it's high-speed trains, they're the most controllable. It's kind of the trains in between the medium-distance regionals that are the ones that go the most haywire because there are many lines. There's a lot of complex track sharing. You never are going to get the budget to fully grade separate everything. So that's where you're going to get the most cascade of delay. In Germany, the issue is that these regional trains, are delaying the intercities when they share tracks. And here, the main sharing is going to be, okay, there's the New York to, or there's Penn Station access, but that's on the same line anyway. Here it's going to be with a very urban train where, first of all, it's very controllable. And by very controllable, I mean in the absolute worst case scenario, where somehow the single track mucks everything up, you reduce the single track to a shuttle, which is going to piss off the people of Manhasset and Port Washington. But they're just not that significant to the line's ridership. Yeah, expand Great Neck to a third track, to a pocket track, or just spend money in double track, which does require takings, but is viable. They will complain, but it's viable. So this is where they should be doing this, and because this is going to be regularly, let's say every 5 minutes peak, again, only sharing with a short trunk that has one station where you have multiple tracks. Because of that, you're getting into a point where you can slot an intercity or longer range regional on this every 5 minutes. And yeah, okay, it just means that the intercities have to be spaced in multiples of 5 minutes. It is a constraint, but it is not an enormous constraint. And this is something that does actually work reasonably well, I think. So, Steph, you're asking me about political challenges and practical first steps. Not first steps, first steps. This is not Hebrew. P and F are distinct phonemes. They are not in grammatical alternation. What are the first steps for starting to change your word plan? So this plan means a lot of different things. This includes commuter rail through running, which is something that a lot of people in New York are talking about as a wish list. Is it going to happen? It's unclear, but people talk about it as a wish list. I do think that the fact that counterintuitively making these trains more local will actually save the suburbanites time does make it politically easier. The main challenge is that the traditional railroaders don't believe that this is possible, but it is fine. I mean, boomers believe a lot of very strange things. The LIR also believed that Penn Station access was a bad project because it would compete for tunnel slots with the LIR trains, and then Helena Williams lost her job, and the Long Islanders stopped saying that. Um, the issue about the boomers is they're very hierarchical, and the so this is something that I don't think it's something that is very novel, but I don't think it's politically contentious, if that makes sense. Like I can see a way in which even something that's obviously a net win, let's call it upzoning and building more housing in a constrained urban environment, let's call it New York or London or even Berlin, to be honest, where that is politically contentious, not just because it's novel, but because it actually, first of all, it reduces it reduces house values because it means that there's less of a housing shortage. So homeowner groups tend to be against that. Second, it changes neighborhoods, by which I mean it creates more growth in neighborhoods. The new people in the neighborhoods are by definition new. They might have different consumption patterns, which is fine if you just because they're also because more people means just more shops and such, but it does mean that the community leaders are going to have to share space. And and whereas an ordinary business owner doesn't care, they see more clients. A community leader lives in a political environment where you just grab other people's money and compete for space. And so for the sort of people who exist not just in the business community, but in the which is so empowered in neighborhood politics, but the people who lead neighborhood politics, growth is bad. This is an anti-developmental class, um, and and honestly, quite a lot of developmentalism at national scale has been about reducing the power of of such groups, and so and so stuff like adding more urban housing, again, it weakens the community leaders. Now, this is something that doesn't quite weaken the community leaders because the community leaders, yeah, they have opinions about their train station, their line, their system, but they want the trains to be faster. Um, and yeah, they also want I mean, in a place like Long Island, they want the trains to have fewer black people, but they want the trains to be faster, is the bigger issue. And um, now, as I said, in Boston, there's less of this contention. I mean, Boston's more segregated than New York, I think. But but in Boston, I guess even the city is sufficiently white that, or things are not the city but are functionally the city, by which I mean Cambridge, that the suburbanites. I'm not going to say they don't fear the city. Many of them do. The ones who work at Route 128 and avoid the city, but it's there's less contentious urban versus suburban politics than in New York. But we have not heard any of that pushback to regional area. Again, it's mostly railroaders not believing that it is possible. A lot of delay for the sake of delay, but it's not. Um, but yeah, a lot of it is. In Boston, also there was a problem that Governor Baker doesn't believe in public investment. Think of him as the John Major of America. Um, yeah, so selling this to politicians is the hard part because essentially the problem with trying to over theorize politicians is that the state is an absolute monarchy. The monarch changes every couple of years, and I'm not saying the American state. I'm saying every modern state is absolutist in like any kind of pre-modern sense of the king has magnets. No, the king has no magnets. I mean, there might be political factions, but this is actually you see the. I mean, so Steffi, for you see this a lot with the Labour Party, where um, a lot where it's dawning on a lot of Labour pundits that essentially none of what they say matters to how Keith is going to govern the country after he wins. If what the poll or what are the polls saying? Oh wow! Look at this. The Tories might be. Oh my God! The Tories are doing so well in the polls. They're only 20. Oh my God! I'm seeing two different polls that show the Tories only 16 points behind. Yeah. Okay, so you understand. We all understand that if these polls hold, then do they have a seat projection somewhere? Consider seat projections. Yeah. I think everyone understands that if this holds and Parliament returns about 500 Labour members, and I guess the Conservatives still get to be the official opposition, but barely, uh, then Britain is for 5 years the dictatorship of Keir Starmer. This means that you can't really theorize because everything just depends on what Keith wants. Uh, and this gets even to the point where a lot of Labour pundits are inventing scandals about him just because they don't want him to win big, because then it's going to be harder for them to say, if you don't listen to me, you will lose. There's some warped incentives for party pundits about this. But anyway, the issue is that it just boils down to, is one random politician in favor of this or against this? This is really frustrating because a lot of it is stuff you can't theorize. How do you theorize Emmanuel Macron, for example? Like you can say, yeah, well, it's a long-term trend of neoliberalization of the center left. Sure, but I can point out about 10 different things about Macron that are not exactly the same thing as neoliberalization of the center left. A lot of it is just that random. It often just boils down to, does one politician want it or not? And yeah, he's wishy-washy about everything. He's one of these politicians. Yeah, there are these politicians that see themselves up by 20 points and start saying what they really think, figuring that if they lose votes over it, they're going to win by 10, and that's still a big majority. Keith is one of the ones that see himself that Keith sees himself up by 20 points and is just gonna try to stay 20 points and not take any risks, I think. I doubt that he's gonna actually fight, let's say, self-ID. Um, yeah, and so this is not, so a lot of it just depends on which politician, and this is not something that can be predicted in advance. These people essentially can never make credible promises on technical matters. On big political things, they can. On big political things, you can actually get a politician to make a promise. It needs to be on the record, but activist groups and more experienced activist groups do tell politicians that they want to hear a promise made publicly. When a politician tells you something privately, it's as if they didn't say it. They can deny that they made such a promise, or they can say the circumstances change. Who's the press going to believe, you or someone who just won the election? When it's public, it's harder to renege on promises. But this is usually on big political things, and even then, does anyone really believe that? Does anyone really believe it when Keith says, when Keith rules out any kind of rapprochement with the EU? Keith reads the same polls about most Britons wanting to rejoin too. But he just doesn't want it to be a Brexit election. And so, with how it's done, it's so random that, and again, it's really frustrating because it's very easy to theorize. It's very easy to come up with ideas of how it needs to be done, and then they make sense for the first two politicians, and they completely fail for the third. It's like these pigeons where they invent elaborate rituals about how to get food when the actual gizmo that determines how much grain they get in the cage is randomized. And yeah, so this is a big problem. Again, I can tell you that there's going to be a lot of trad rail order opposition, but this is opposition that has been and can be very easily steamrolled. Actual suburbanites, I don't think we're going to give a shit. And especially in Long Island, they're used to changing in Jamaica, so telling them to change to Sunnyside, not a big deal. With high-speed rail, it's something that a lot of national level politicians want. Even ones that are not northeastern go to New York to raise money. They ride their trains. their staffers ride the trains. They care. This actually is really important because there's a lot of actual NIMBYism. So I don't mean petty people who are like NIMBYs but are making non-NIMBY demands. I mean actual NIMBYs all over coastal Connecticut. Even in Rhode Island, I saw people starting to say, well, nobody involved us in planning. Good. About the transition from I-95 back to the main line, that they said that there might be impact. And I think everyone understands that nobody cares what is it called? It's not Ecosia, right? It's Ecori. Yeah, this. I think everyone, including the people who wrote this, understands that it will happen or not happen regardless of what a bunch of South County NIMBYs think. As some Charlestown officials wondering whether a plan might not be dead after all. Through sections of town. Bear in mind, when they say sections of town, you might think town, but it's not actually urban. It might be okay. It might be audible from or visible from a house, but think of it as trains that might go here, something like that, or here. So it's going to go through farmland and maybe have to acquire like 10 houses in this entire stretch. It's something that's really important just because people. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you won't need B1. But there is this issue where and this is specific to New England, where New England is, I think southern New England is entirely divided into towns. Okay, I have no idea where Charlestown thinks there's going to be impact there, when the trains are always going to go. Like, maybe this is still part of Charlestown. I don't know. But note, actual built-up area over here, southernmost the trucks are going to be is about here. Yeah. Where this is the boundaries of the town. And I bring this up just because in Alexis de Tocqueville, when he was writing very positively about the town governance in New England, he was writing in French, so he called it by the French term commune. And then I don't remember if it was the first translation or the most common, but it was a British translation into English, which instead of calling it by the American original name, which is town, it called it a township. It gets to the point where you can tell whether an American got an idea from translated de Tocqueville or directly from an American source by whether they say town or township about New England. This is called a town. Now, you might be able to tell directly from Google Earth Tourism that this is not a town. This, yeah, absolutely. This is a forest. And yeah, it's a forest where some people live. But it's a forest. So again, don't imagine it as like a highway cleaving a neighborhood or highway cleaving a town, like something that actually impacts a lot of people. This is something that is at most, again, visible to or audible to a handful of people. The visibility doesn't matter. The audibility at that distance is not going to be. It's not going to be a big deal either. Again, I'm pretty sure we're talking about like something like 10 houses need to be bought for this. And it brings up just because like people keep saying that NIMBYs are intractable. No, they're not. They're very easy to steamroll in America. And so, yeah, politically, the point is that high-speed rail, people want it. It's just that the current plans involve high-speed rail costing $300 million. Semi-high-speed rail costing 120. I think 117 to be precise. What it actually should be costing is somewhere between 15 and 20. Obviously, this gets funded at 15. I think they have 30 something in the bank. I think they have 30 in the bank. That's the budget. The report that as I said, I'm not literally working on the report right now. And by right now, I don't mean in general. I am working on it. I mean, I'm not working on it on stream, but I'm pointing out how the LIRR fits into this, which is just figure out how to sever everything other than Port Washington, which oddly is the easiest thing to merged into the system. And once there's a plan that has a reasonable cost, it costs, to be very clear, Amtrak can do, and none of the commuter rail managers can do, and the state DOTs can do, but that's fine. You can hire a project manager not from these things. It's like Americans are good at hiring outsiders. Just can't be an outsider who was hired from GM or something. Just hire the people who are running these abroad. Like hire the construction equivalent of Byford. This is one of the points they're making is that Byford was incredibly popular in New York media, and has not received significant pushback. Cuomo didn't like him, but that Cuomo had friction with Byford primed all of New York media to understand that Cuomo is not good. Maybe you shouldn't criticize him too openly because he can destroy your career or something. And that is something that changed, especially after Corona, but even more so after the sexual assault allegations came out. But it did not endear Cuomo to anyone who matters that he pushed away Byford. To the contrary, Byford remains a very popular figure. And again, a lot of it is what a randomly selected politician, let's call her Kathy Hochul or Phil Murphy, thinks. I will say at federal level, it's not like that at all. The American federal government is American state governments are absolute monarchies of the governor. As long as he has control, as long as he has same party control of the state legislature. The federal government is not like that at all. The federal government is, I mean, if I'm analogizing state governments with unified partisan control to an absolute monarchy in which the king can do whatever he wants. For example, sign a ban on indoor dining, get caught dining at French Laundry with a donor, and then get the entire party to endorse him and say in the recall election, and then beat the recall election by a larger margin than he won in the first place. So the federal government, when it has unified control, which it currently doesn't, but I mean it did for 2 years, and I think Speaker McCarthy is doing a marvelous job to help the Democrats regain unified control. But unified control, it's more like a, let's call it the post-Stalinist or the post-Khrushchev Soviet Union, where I imagine it's just going to go for a consultancy. I imagine some agencies will want to hire him, but essentially everything is a step down from New York. And like I mean, getting him into Amtrak would be interesting, but Amtrak has different issues, like for mainline rail. And these are not people who think about hiring permanent civil. They're just kind of weird. In America, civil service is either an overclass of clueless political appointees, so not civil service, or it's internal. Like the idea that you hire an academic as permanent staff, or a successful civil servant from elsewhere as permanent staff, that does not happen. Permanent staff have to be on a very rigid path. This is a problem. And an outsider is essentially a political appointee. And in the case of Byford, this political appointee, no, not just the railroads. Remember, the Northeast Corridor does not have the railroads unless you're talking about state-owned things, and often Amtrak abuses these more than they abuse it, by which I mean anywhere outside southwestern Connecticut. And to be honest, the difference between Amtrak and let's say Metro North or MBTA is just, it's all the same truck. It's very much all the same truck, and yeah, they each one recognizes the others are direct when they're dealing with it on the other side, but they're all the same. It's like it's like saying no, this bullshit that the Tories did was not this Tory leader, it was that Tory leader. Like they're all the same. Like there's no real what is the difference between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss? And it's kind of the same thing. So in Britain, the solution is to consider maybe not have the Tories in charge after what is it? It's been 13 years already. And in the United States, it's to understand that it's not about the petty struggles between the different passenger railroads on the Northeast Corridor. It's about actual coordination. Actual coordination is going to be the hardest because, again, just because it's never been done in the US before. The main issue is it requires an active federal government rather than one that only nudges other people passively. But this is something that is actually doable. The at the end of the day, there's actually a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. The pot of gold being high-speed rail on a normal budget that has in fact been appropriated already. Um, Again, the commuter rail throttling is, again, I honestly can't tell who wants it. Like, I mean, the Tri-State Transportation Campaign wants it. A bunch of NIMBYs who are allied to Rethink want it just because they think it's an alternative to building skyscrapers. They're much. It's kind of weird. The anti-Penn South people from Rethink are less concerned with the cost of demolishing this entire block than they are with plans to build more skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan. On the idea that it is somehow inappropriate to build skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan, and the one lasted longer than the crop of lettuce. I have a strong suspicion that if Sunak had beaten Truss the first time and he had tried to do the same tax cut, he would not have lasted the crop of lettuce. I mean, Truss and Sunak are both pieces of paper with Tory written on them. Bear in mind, Keith is a piece of paper with Labour written on it. So anyway, the point is that a lot of it is just random, which is really frustrating, but it's pretty random, I think. I think we're done with like the main gist of what I was going to say, like just explaining how LIRR fits into the running and what it means for intercity rail. Again, it's kind of counterintuitive that there shouldn't be Newark to Jamaica. So it means harder to get from Jersey to the airport, but it does mean easier to get from Jersey to Flushing, for example. Quite a lot of Chinese Americans in Jersey who would like to visit such an important ethnic center. So or honestly, like even, I mean that's not relevant to do you go to Flushing or Jamaica? You can do it either way, but lots of Indian Americans in Jersey, for whom the main the main ethnic center of Indian New York is here, Jackson Heights. The main ones of Chinese New York are Chinatown, Flushing. Also, Sunset Park has a lot of Chinese immigrants, but you're saying is that the main centers, so to speak, like the places people go to from elsewhere, are Chinatown and Flushing. So for Indians, it is Jackson Heights, which is not on the commuter train. IBX can get there. IBX is planned to be to terminate here, but it's going to be annoying with the transfer. But you can still do train over here, then take the 7, 2 stops. Not the best, but you can still do it. That's fine. And and again, jobs here, and of course this goes in reverse from Oliver here to Jersey, and this also helps separate most of this from intercity trains, except the line that is literally the same route as them, and a line that is so urban that oddly it fits well because you can just run the trains every 5 minutes at peak, and then the other trains will just run every 5 minutes, and then you just need to pick which among these 12 slots that you're getting per hour gets to be an intercity and which doesn't. And so I guess the main issue is like 3-way track sharing, so intercity, Penn Station access, and Port Washington, is that this forces the intercities to be evenly spaced through Penn Station, because you can't have something like 0, 5, 10, 0 and 5, and then 0, and the train departing 0 is faster than 0, 5 train. It has to be 0, 10, 20, which isn't as flexible, but it's actually fine with the way that the track sharing is going to work with these trains, the express trains here up to Stamford. And past Stamford, yeah, you can do some trains going to Stanford and some trains. Some trains stopping in Stanford and some trains not, and that I don't know. It turns there, what is it, 0, 10, 20 to I don't know 0, 15, 25, um, or something like that, and then the 25 I guess is the one that would divert to Springfield, and then through here it is 0 and 15. I guess if some trains stop in New London and some don't, then you want something like 0, 10, 25, and then the 25 diverts, and then and then here it becomes a 0, 10, and the 10 becomes a 15 after it stops in London, which is kind of annoying because it means that you don't have through service from. It means you can't have the same train stop in Stamford and London, which is kind of annoying, but it is still, I think, viable. Or it can do something the other way around, where it's what 0, yeah. But all of this, I think, works out, and it essentially means that the LIRR is not the hard bit to plan, just because again it's a 2-track line, and the single track tail here, first of all, can be double tracked, and second, if it can't, it can be scheduled, and if it can't, it can be reduced to a shuttle, this will annoy people, but you can annoy these people to build high speed rail. It's not these people because Great Neck doesn't give a shit. These people. Yeah. So if people have questions, I will answer. If not, we can end this. We don't need the tube in front of us. Oh, thanks. Wealthy NIMBYs deserve to be. Remember, annoying people is a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. Remember, having the right enemies does not actually build trains. The bulldozer is a tool. The bulldozer is not why you do things. Are there other questions or comments? No and no, respectively. So, there's no real reason to convert this to a subway. The reason is it doesn't have anything to. So, why would you convert it to a subway? If you're just running service between Jamaica and downtown Brooklyn, use the technology that is already there, which is commuter rail. You do not need to deal with any commuter rail bullshit to run service here. For example, there is a labor agreement with LIRR requiring a minimum of 2 conductors on every train. So first of all, they use more than the minimum 2, but also labor agreements with railroads, with railroad workers in the United States can be revoked unilaterally by management during a strike. New York State passed a law called the Taylor Law, plus a Triber Amendment, which bans this practice. So if a labor agreement lapses and people can't come to an agreement, then it just stays it just stays in operation prorated. So management cannot unilaterally change terms, and labor cannot go on strike, which is the worst possible compromise because overpaid workers cannot be laid off this way, and underpaid workers can't strike to get better pay and conditions. However, this does not apply to mainline rail because mainline rail is under federal preemption, and therefore New York State can say, we're not going to have conductors in this. We will last this strike. So like managerially, there's no reason to detach this from mainline rail. Technologically, the most important things are waivable, like the car body buff strength rule. So the question is, what do you want to connect this with? So east of Jamaica, you only have LIRR. I mean, yes, there's the E train, great, but or the J train, they extend one stop past Jamaica Station, and that would be a reverse branch, not just a reverse branch in the sense of interlining, but a reverse branch in the sense of wasted capacity. When you have too many tracks when you have more capacity in we have more tracks in the core than past the core, and then you just can't fill them. That wastes capacity. So there's no reason based on what it can run east of Jamaica. Now, what about west of downtown Brooklyn? Well, I did just X the subway track map, so let's restore it. So the train station is here. Where can you run through if there's an additional line here that's a subway line? Let's see. You don't have space here, or here, or here. You don't have space here. You do have space on the local tracks of the R. That is an underused line that could be so connected. And I guess this means that you can have Broadway local trains, like doubly trains or something, either go local on 4th Ave or run this way to Jamaica, but that is a really awkward tractor. So no real reason to do so. By the way, if you're wondering why it's such an awkward tractor, it's because it only really works at getting you Jamaica to Lower Manhattan, and unfortunately the R is making so many stops here. So it's going to be the R, then it would be connecting around here. So you get DCAB, and then you get Lawrence, and then you get Lawrence, then you get Court Street. And if you're wondering about better service to downtown Brooklyn, sure, there's so many other lines that could connect it for that. Doesn't matter too much. And then it makes so many stops in Manhattan. So unless you're going direct to Whitehall, it's not actually very fast. It's not actually going to beat the E to Midtown, or let alone beat better commuter trains to Penn Station. Or thereabouts, so it's actually going to not be a very useful connection. And this means that converting it to a subway... Okay. So the part east of Jamaica. Okay, so you're asking about the Atlantic branch? Again, why? What is it going to connect with the E train? So first of all, I guess it's going to be a branch off the E train, but to be honest, it's not something that New York City can do, but it's something that a city with same construction cost would just loop-de-loop here. That's fine. But, again, there's the question of what you're gaining from this. What are you gaining from removing branches that could connect with the Atlantic branch? You're connecting these people here and here to the E train better, but they can already change to the E train at Jamaica. So you're saving them a transfer. You're making it harder for them to get to downtown Brooklyn. I mean, Manhattan is more important than downtown Brooklyn, but you're essentially orphaning downtown Brooklyn to Jamaica for no real reason. So I don't think this is actually a good conversion. This is something that can be treated as a very highly separated S-Bahn, like much more Berlin S-Bahn than Zürich or München. Same thing that the Port Washington branch would be if it didn't happen to optimally be doing this little track share. But the or but it's something that doesn't really work as a subway. I don't think it's like E extensions, let alone J extensions. The J is just so certainly shouldn't be a JZ extension just because the JZ are so god awful slow. That to basically every destination, it's better to just permanently attach Long Beach and Far Rockaway with um, Jamaica to downtown Brooklyn, and then if you want to change to the J, do so maybe at Jamaica, maybe East. I mean, technically East New York is not on the J because it's not quite Broadway Junction, but either do a walkway to Broadway Junction if people for some reason really want to go to Williamsburg, or because Williamsburg is not actually a destination. It's a residential neighborhood. Um, People can just take a train from downtown Brooklyn to Lower Manhattan, or to really anywhere that the JMZ goes, like to China. Chinatown is a destination. The JMZ take you to Chinatown, and the BDNQ from Flatbush will take you to Chinatown so much faster. Um, so you can just do citywide fare integration. You're not actually gaining anything from running that as a subway. If anything, institutionally, I mean, you need essentially institutionally any kind of reform that makes it a subway. You can just use it to um, tell the LIRR that they're not going to be conductors on this line. If they go on strike, that's fine. It is legal in the United States. Over an economic strike, so a strike in protest of legal work conditions that the union dislikes. For example, in American law, by the way, in American law, if you strike for higher wages, benefits, and work rules and so on, rather than striking in protest of illegal work conditions, it is legal for management to retaliate by hiring strikebreakers. It is not legal for management to preferentially fire union leaders, but it is legal for management to say, we're going to hire strikebreakers, that's fine. So the and remember, you're not gonna. I mean, yeah, it's contentious with the union, but detaching it from the LIRR and making the subways equally contentious with the union. The LIRR and the subway don't have the same unions; they hate each other. So, you're not actually getting anything either technical or political from doing so. So, just just run normal S-Bahn type service there. Um, are there questions? Are there more questions? I should say, or do you have follow-up questions? That's the awkward silence at the end of every video. Punctured only by the sound of the laptop fan. Oh, Sunny, should there be different rolling stocks? No. Um, Something that looks like the current trains but is lighter and has more powerful motors is good for everything equally. Um, there's no good. So sometimes there's a separation, like in city, they're about to transition to a fleet separation in which the local lines are single deck to reduce dwell times, and the longer range lines are double deck for more seated capacity. The LIR can't really. I mean, the LIR technically has bilevels, but not many. The bilevel EMUs with high platforms. I mean, yeah, they exist, but it will be new to them either way. And and they can't fit into the east side, and I don't think they can fit into the east side access tunnel. Um, you can fit a single deck. By the way, you can fit a single deck EMU with a pantograph in this tunnel. You can't fit a double decker. So like this is roughly British loading gauge. Um, so I don't really think there's a point in rolling stock separation. Um, yeah, exactly. Having many doors is really useful, but this is something that can be swapped as time goes by, and like just getting trains instead of having 2 door pairs per car, having 3 or 4 door pairs. Um, it's not. I mean, the issue is that the biggest bottleneck to this is specifically Penn Station, and it's the same Penn Station or Grand Central, and it's the same one for all the lines. So if for some reason you need trains with more doors, I don't think that you only need them on the local trains. You need them equally on the local and express trains to the extent there's any kind of separation. The these trains, the ones I call line 1, probably need this more than line 2 because line 2 has 2 stops in Manhattan and this only has 1. But that's so peripheral that I don't think is like. First of all, I don't think it's terribly important because the limiting factor at Penn Station is not the doors on the trains; it's the platforms. But also the but also it's not really something where it makes sense to like do separate fleets for like separate um, distances from city center. Maybe it's separate fleets per line just because they're not all bought at the same time. In the same way that the subway has multiple fleets, and I don't mean numbered lines and lettered lines. I mean the lettered lines have separate fleets just because they're bought over a long period of time, and then usually each class of train is assigned to a specific yard. So this is when different lines can have different train sets, but it's not. But there's no real reason to try to pair certain trains with, let's say, express lines and others with locals, if that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. So bear in mind that the entire LRR has level boarding, as is the entirety of Metro North, with the exception of the Waterbury Bunch. Um, and New Yorkers are generally good at this. Um, Actually, one of the things that I felt really jarring in Paris was that Parisians don't let you get off the train before they get on, and the same is true of Berliners. But like New Yorkers actually are way better behaved on the subway than Parisians and especially Berliners. Um, New Yorkers are very loud, but on basic subway, but they have basic um, rail riding etiquette, um, but in ways that um, unfortunately not all Europeans do. By the way, London is very good. Um, Londoners are very good at this as well. Um, Berlin is fine about certain things, but on others, Berliners are not very good at standing in line. Um, Germans cut you off in line. Brits and Americans don't. And so and very obvious up just because um, I think it's important to highlight it because there's this kind of myth among. I'm not going to say New York elites because elite conjures at least I don't know top 10 or 20%, and this is more horizontal. Like New Yorkers think that New Yorkers are very ill behaved because every New Yorker thinks that all the other New Yorkers are trash. Um, and again, this is not just elite, i.e., the rich hating the poor or the middle class hating the poor, but it's also different groups or even white people hating people of color. This is horizontal. This is also horizontal, and this is just bullshit. New Yorkers are actually pretty well behaved on this. Um, and yeah, no, so New Yorkers don't have this problem at all with escalators. They're also good at escalators. They don't generally block doors. They're very good at letting you get off the train before they get on. Um, they're generally good about taking off their bags on a crowded train because a person with a bag on their back consumes more space than the person with a bag between their legs. New Yorkers are actually pretty good at this. Whenever there's a real problem, it's just, at least on the subway, they do a PSA campaign, and people actually do follow it. Americans generally are much better behaved than everyone thinks. And again, this is also especially true of New Yorkers. So much, like, there's kind of like a New York code of like, you expect that the other person that you walk that is that is passing by you when you walk on the street at 1 in the morning is an axe murderer. So you will essentially avoid triggering too much aggression. And New York, by the way, does not have a very high crime rate. I mean, New York has a high murder rate because the Americans think that the right to shoot other people, especially if those other people are queer, is in the Constitution. But New York does not objectively have a high crime rate. But anyway, yeah, that's the issue with etiquette. I will say that certainly if you only do two door pairs per car on commuter trains in New York and not 3 or 4, then it's obligatory, I think, for the doors in the future to be triple wide and not just double wide. So for people who don't know what a triple wide door is, I think single wide is 70 centimeters. Trains in New York are double wide, so I think it's about 1.30 meters, 1.40 meters. They are not showing me the rolling stock. This is not, I mean, it's not from the correct angle. MI09, yeah, this shows. Can you see how massive these doors are? This is called triple wide. This is about 2 meters or 2.20 meters. And this is weird where they're bi-level between the door pairs, which is really strange. And by really strange, I mean these trains cost so much money because this is literally the only place in the world where such trains exist. France has not really heard of standardization, unfortunately. I mean, for some things they have, not for Parisian train. So doing this, but not by level, and maybe instead of having door, you put, I don't know, door, I think would be very valuable on all LIRR. This is again all LIRR trains. You lose maybe 1 row of seats per door, maybe even less than that, right? Because the pitch is a little less than the pitch on a commuter train is a little less than a meter, and the difference is like 70 centimeters per like. So yeah, I mean, you can absolutely lose 2 rows of seats to get this. Again, not 3 doors, but 2 triple wide doors. Yeah, that's fine. So the train is 25. So this is a 22. Yeah, it's about a 22-meter long train, 22.5-meter long train. And let me see if there's a. Maybe this is better. I guess the people are too far away, but you can see. But maybe you can see from here in perspective what it's like. This is really. Yeah. It's very. Yeah. Yeah. This is ungodly wide. And even then, they have dwell time problems at rush hour because bi-levels are not good for this. The internal staircases remain a bottleneck. And if you guys are wondering, the premium of these trains over single levels would have paid for the RERE extension already, to decongest the RERE. A rare case where concrete is the solution. But yeah, anyway, this is the issue with the rolling stock. This is something that can be standardized. I mean, it requires some time to buy just because this requires a massive purchase, and I'm gonna, instead of try to compute this from first principles, tell you what it is. Based on a blog post that I wrote 6 months ago. So the 3-line system is 379 train sets. So yeah, we're talking 4,000 plus cars. Oh god, yeah, that. Anyway, so are there more questions? If there are, I'm gonna do a one last call for questions. To slightly reduce the awkward silence. The awkward silence that's like that always appears 2 minutes from the end of a video. But if there are no further questions, then we can end here. And we will talk again on Tuesday on a topic TBD. So thank you all for watching, and ciao ciao.